There was a time when silence was considered a defect, until she met the only mind that had it. The throne chamber of Vareli's prime pulsed with thought, not sound. A cathedral of consciousness where whispers never touched the air, yet screamed inside her skull. Lysara Vane stood at its center, spine straight, chin lifted, her luminous blue skin catching the silver glow of the neural spires that lined the walls like frozen lightning. Every being in the chamber spoke without speaking, a constant flood of intentions, fears, calculations, lies, admiration, envy, all of it flowing into her. With perfect clarity, she did not need eyes to see, she did not need words to understand. She knew who would betray before betrayal formed, knew who would kneel before their knees bent, knew which diplomat smiled with loyalty and which smiled with poison hidden behind their teeth. This was power. This was order. This was certainty. And for 23 cycles she had never known anything else, until the noise changed. It didn't fade. It didn't stop. It warped, like a signal bending around. Something unseen, like a current hitting a shape that refused to be measured. Lysara's breath caught for half a second. A fracture in perfect rhythm. Her pupils narrowed as she scanned the chamber without moving her head. Every mind still there, still loud, still predictable, except one, standing at the far edge of the diplomatic circle, out of place in posture, in silence, in presence, the human, Ethan Cole, listed in the manifest as a systems engineer, 6 feet 190 pounds. Light skin, brown hair slightly out of regulation, heart rate elevated but controlled. She could read the body, the micro-movements, the heat signature, but the mind, there was nothing, no whisper, no echo, no defensive block, no static, just absence, like staring into a starless section of space where even darkness refused to exist. Lysara shifted her focus, pressing harder, extending the full reach of her telepathic field the way she had been trained since childhood, the way she had broken generals twice her age, the way she had unraveled spies in seconds. She expected resistance, she expected complexity, she expected something, but what met her was not resistance, it was reflection, her own thoughts, amplified, redirected, echoing back at her with a clarity that made her pulse spike. She felt her own doubt, her own curiosity, her own sudden unease, and for the first time in her life, she did not know if those feelings belonged to her or were being shown to her. Ethan Cole lifted his gaze then, not with reverence, not with fear, just awareness, like he knew someone was looking at him, even without hearing her. And when their eyes met across the chamber, something inside her system faltered, not failure, not weakness, something far more dangerous. Unpredictability. The council continued speaking. Agreements forming, alliances shifting, but Lysara no longer heard them. The noise that had once defined her world now felt distant, secondary, irrelevant, because in a room filled with voices, she had found the only silence, and it was looking back at her like it understood something she did not. The chamber did not quiet when she dismissed the court. It never did. Thoughts lingered in the architecture like heat in metal, but Lysara walked through them as if they no longer belonged to her. Her pace measured, each step echoing softly against the polished obsidian floor while her mind strained backward toward the anomaly she had just encountered. Guards parted before her without needing instruction, their loyalty loud and unquestioning in her perception, yet she barely registered them. Because even now, at a distance of nearly 40 feet, she could still not hear him. Ethan Cole remained a void behind her, a shape that bent the current of every other mind in the room. And that was not possible, not within any known framework of neural resonance or telepathic frequency alignment. Inside her private chamber the doors sealed with a soft hiss, cutting off the physical world but not the mental one. Voices still pressed in from beyond the walls, advisors, servants, distant pilots. In orbit, all of them present, all of them known. She exhaled slowly and reached for control, isolating signals one by one, filtering until only silence remained. But even that silence was artificial, constructed, shaped by her will. It was never real, not until him. She turned toward the central console, its surface lighting up in response to her presence. Data streams cascading in precise columns, biometric scans, environmental readings, linguistic analysis, everything the system could gather. About the human visitor, height, weight, oxygen consumption rate, even the subtle tremor in his fingers when he first entered the chamber, yet nowhere in the data was the absence she had felt. Nowhere was there a measurement for nothing. Lasara extended her perception again, not outward this time, but inward, replaying the moment their eyes met, the distortion, the echo, the way her own thoughts had come back sharper, clearer, almost unfamiliar, as if she had heard herself without the noise of everyone else layered on top. Her fingers hovered above the console, then lowered without input. Data would not explain this. Data required patterns, and he had none. A soft chime interrupted her focus, the system announcing a presence outside her chamber. She did not need confirmation to know who it was. She could not hear his mind, but she could feel the space he created, like pressure without weight. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, something she had not done since childhood training, then spoke, her voice steady despite the unfamiliar tension beneath it. Enter. The door slid open with a controlled whisper, and Ethan Cole stepped inside alone. No escort, no hesitation, his boots stopping exactly 6 feet from where she stood, as if he understood boundaries without being told. He looked around briefly, taking in the room, the light, the architecture, then returned his gaze to her. Calm, present, unreadable. Lasara focused again, pushing carefully this time, not with force, but with precision, searching for any trace, any signal, any fragment of thought she could grasp. And again there was nothing, no barrier, no resistance, just absence, her own awareness reflecting back at her like a mirror she had never known existed. She studied his face, the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the steady rhythm of his pulse visible at his neck. Everything about him was human, ordinary, measurable, except the one thing that mattered. "What are you?" she asked quietly, not as a command, not as an accusation, but as a question she could not answer on her own. Ethan blinked once, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Not in arrogance, not in fear, just something simple, almost disarming. "Just a guy who fixes broken systems," he said. And for the first time in her life, Lasara Vane did not know if the truth had just been spoken or if she had simply heard what she wanted to believe. The room held its breath in a way no chamber ever had before, not because the air changed, but because her perception did. Lasara remained perfectly still, yet everything inside her shifted. Every instinct trained to interpret, to analyze, to control now reached outward and found nothing to hold on to. Ethan Cole stood exactly where he had stopped, hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders squared but not rigid, the posture of someone who was not trying to prove anything. And that alone unsettled her more than any hidden intent ever could. She circled him slowly, each step deliberate, her bare feet silent against the smooth floor while her awareness stretched and folded around him again and again, searching not just for thoughts but for absence within absence, something that would define the edges of whatever he was. Yet he did not distort her senses this time, not like before. Instead he remained constant, like a fixed point in a storm of shifting signals. She extended a hand, stopping inches from his temple, not touching, not yet, her focus narrowing to a precision that had once unraveled encrypted minds in seconds. And still, there was nothing, no resistance, no flicker, not even the faint subconscious noise that every living being produced without effort. It was not silence as she understood it. It was something deeper, something that did not exist within her framework at all. Her fingers moved closer, finally brushing lightly against his skin, warm, human, real. And in that instant the world did not explode, it did not fracture, it simply echoed. Her own thoughts came back sharper, cleaner, stripped of the endless layers she had always carried. She felt her own uncertainty, as if it had been handed back to her, unfiltered, undeniable. Lasara withdrew her hand, as if the contact itself had revealed too much, not about him, but about her. Ethan did not step back, did not flinch. His gaze followed her calmly, studying her with the same quiet curiosity she had been using on him. And that symmetry, that equal footing, was something she had never experienced before. "Everyone else," she said slowly, choosing each word with care. "They are loud, even when they believe they are not. There is always something beneath the surface." Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching his expression for reaction she could not hear. But you. She paused, not because she lacked words, but because she lacked certainty. There is nothing. Ethan exhaled softly, not defensive, not offended, just thoughtful, as if he were considering a problem from a different angle. That depends on what you are listening for, he replied, his voice even, grounded, the kind of tone that did not try to fill space. Lasara tilted her head a fraction, analyzing not the words but the delivery, the lack of tension, the absence of performance. Explain, she said, and for the first time, it was not a command. It was a request. Ethan glanced briefly toward the glowing console, then back to her. Where I come from, not everything that matters makes noise, he said, choosing his words carefully. Some things you only notice when everything else stops. Lasara felt the statement land in a place she did not have a name for, a conceptual gap forming where certainty had always lived. She had spent her entire life surrounded by signals, defined by them, empowered by them, but she had never questioned what existed beyond them, never needed to. Until now, she stepped back, creating space not for safety, but for perspective, her mind racing not with external voices, but with her own unfiltered thoughts, and that alone was disorienting. If I cannot read you, she said quietly, more to herself than to him, then I cannot predict you. Ethan gave a small nod, as if that conclusion made sense. That sounds about right, he said, and there was no fear in his voice, no urgency, just acceptance, and that acceptance, that complete lack of concern for how she perceived him, created a new kind of tension in the room, one she could not map, could not categorize, could not control. Lasara Vane had spent her entire life mastering every mind she encountered, but standing 6 feet away from a human who offered nothing and yet changed everything. She realized for the first time that control had never required understanding, and now, faced with something she could not control, she had no choice but to begin understanding instead. Lasara did not summon the guards. She did not call for advisors, and for the first time since ascending to her station, she chose not to report what she had found. The silence between them was no longer empty. It had shaped now. Wait. Something that lingered even after neither of them spoke. She moved toward the far side of the chamber where a narrow viewport revealed the curve of the planet below, storms drifting in slow spirals across continents that glowed faintly under the atmosphere. She had always found comfort in patterns, in predictability, in systems that could be read and understood. But tonight, even the storms looked different, less like equations and more like something alive. Ethan remained where he was for a moment before stepping closer, not too close, just enough to stand within her peripheral vision, as if he understood distance without needing instruction. Do you ever turn it off? He asked, his voice quiet but steady, not intrusive, just present. Lasara did not answer immediately, her gaze still fixed on the shifting clouds below. No, she said finally. There is no off, only less. She lifted a hand slightly, fingers tightening as if adjusting an invisible dial. I can narrow it, focus it, but it is always there. She turned her head just enough to look at him. Every thought, every intention, every doubt, it does not stop. Ethan nodded once, absorbing that without judgment. That sounds exhausting, he said, and the simplicity of the statement struck her harder than any formal analysis ever had. She had never labeled it as exhaustion. It had always been power, always been necessity, always been identity. It is efficient, she replied automatically, but the word felt less solid than it used to. Ethan leaned lightly against the console behind him, arms relaxed, posture open. Back home, we have noise too, he said, not like yours, but constant in its own way, signals, notifications, people talking all the time. Most of it does not mean anything, but it fills your head anyway. He paused briefly, searching for the right words. You do not realize how much of it is there until it is gone. Lasara watched him carefully, not for thoughts, but for truth in his expression, the small shifts in his face, the steadiness in his eyes, things she had never needed to rely on before. And when it is gone? She asked, her voice softer now, less guarded. What remains? Ethan glanced past her toward the planet, then back again. Whatever you actually are thinking, he said. Not what everyone else is thinking around you. Not what they expect, just you. The words settled into her awareness in a way that felt unfamiliar, almost intrusive, because they did not come from the outside. They came from within, triggered by him, shaped by her own interpretation. Lasara turned fully to face him now, the distance between them no longer strategic, but intentional. "You assume I have something separate from all of that," she said, not defensive, but uncertain. Ethan did not answer right away. He simply held her gaze, calm, unshaken, as if he did not need to rush the conclusion. "Everyone does," he said eventually. "They just do not always get a chance to hear it." The room fell quiet again, but this time the quiet did not feel like absence. It felt like space. Space where something could exist that had never been allowed before. Lasara lowered her gaze briefly, not in submission, but in thought, real thought, unfiltered, unshared, and it unsettled her more than any external threat ever could, because for the first time, the unknown was not standing in front of her, it was beginning to form inside her, and she had no idea what it would become. The silence between them did not fade when neither of them spoke. It deepened, settling into the space like something alive, something neither of them fully understood, yet both could feel. Lasara remained near the viewport, her posture composed but no longer rigid, her awareness shifting in unfamiliar patterns as she deliberately pulled back from the endless stream of external minds, reducing them, narrowing them, not out of necessity but by choice, something she had never done without purpose before. And as the noise receded, even slightly, she felt it again, that strange clarity, not imposed, not forced, but emerging on its own. Ethan watched her without interruption, his presence steady, almost grounding, not because he changed the room, but because he did not add to it, and that absence had become the most noticeable thing of all. "You are doing it again," he said quietly, not a question, just an observation. Lasara's eyes shifted toward him, a flicker of something new passing through them. Not annoyance, not authority, something closer to awareness. "Doing what?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Ethan gestured lightly with one hand, not pointing, just indicating the space around them. "You are listening to everything except yourself," he said, his tone calm, matter of fact. Lasara inhaled slowly, the motion subtle but deliberate, as if testing the rhythm of her own breath. Something she had never needed to focus on before. "There is nothing to hear," she replied, but the certainty in her voice had softened. Ethan shook his head slightly, not dismissive, just patient. "That is because you are still expecting it to sound like everything else," he said. Lasara turned fully toward him now, studying him not as an anomaly to be solved, but as a perspective she did not yet understand. "And what does it sound like for you?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. Ethan considered that. For a moment, his gaze drifting briefly toward the distant storms beyond the glass before returning to her. "It does not sound like anything most of the time," he said. "It is more like a direction, or a feeling that something is right or wrong before you can explain why." Lasara processed the words slowly, not filtering them through layers of external validation, but allowing them to exist on their own, untested, unconfirmed, and that alone made them feel more significant than any verified data she had ever received. She took a step closer, reducing the distance between them without calculation, without strategy, simply because she chose to. "And you trust that?" she asked, a trace of disbelief woven into the question. Ethan met her gaze evenly. "Not always," he admitted, "but I try to listen to it before everything else drowns it out." The honesty in the statement did not come through as a signal. There was no mental confirmation, no telepathic verification, yet Lasara felt it resonate in a way she could not measure. She closed her eyes briefly, an instinctive gesture rather than a calculated one, and for a moment, she let the external noise fall away further than she ever had before, not completely, never completely, but enough that the constant pressure eased, and in that reduced space, something unfamiliar surfaced, faint, undefined, not a voice, not a thought in the way she understood them, but a presence that was hers and hers alone. It startled her enough that her eyes opened immediately, her gaze locking onto Ethan again as if anchoring herself to something stable. "I felt something," she said, the words quiet, almost uncertain. Ethan did not smile, did not react with surprise. He simply nodded once, as if that was exactly what he expected. "Yeah," he said softly. "That is the part you have been missing." Lasara stood there, motionless, but everything inside her shifted again, not because of what she could hear, but because of what she finally could not. And for the first time, the silence did not feel like a threat. It felt like the beginning of something she had never been trained to understand. The moment did not shatter. It stretched, thin and fragile, as if one wrong movement could collapse everything she had just begun to discover. Lasara remained still, her senses no longer reaching outward by instinct but held back by deliberate control, a discipline she had mastered in reverse, not to sharpen perception but to soften it. And in that restraint, she felt the unfamiliar presence again, faint but undeniable, something that belonged only to her, not shaped by the countless minds around her, not filtered through expectation or duty, just there, waiting. Ethan did not move closer. He did not speak. He simply allowed the silence to exist, and that patience, that refusal to fill the space, gave her something she had never been given before, time to notice. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as the planetary rotation shifted, casting a cooler hue across the walls, and for once, Lasara noticed the change without interpreting it as data. She simply saw it, the way the light reflected off the polished surfaces, the way shadows lengthened along the floor, details that had always been present but never truly observed, because there had always been too much else demanding her attention. "It is quiet," she said slowly, not as a statement of fact, but as a realization forming in real time. Ethan nodded faintly, his expression unchanged. "Yeah," he replied. "That is what it feels like when nothing else is speaking over you." Lasara's gaze drifted past him for a moment, her awareness brushing lightly against the distant minds beyond the chamber. She could still hear them if she reached, still access every thought, every intention. The power had not left her, it had only been set aside, and that distinction unsettled her more than losing it ever could have, because it meant the noise had never been the only way to exist. She stepped away from the viewport, moving toward the center of the room where the neural conduits pulsed faintly beneath the floor. There, steady rhythm, a constant she had always relied on, but now even that felt different, less like a command and more like a background presence. She stopped a few feet from Ethan, the distance no longer defined by hierarchy or caution, but by something far less structured. "If I allow this," she said, her voice steady but layered with something new, "if I choose not to hear everything, then I am choosing to not know everything." The implication hung between them, not as a threat, but as a question of identity. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, not uncomfortable, just engaged. "You are choosing what matters," he said. "There is a difference." Lasara studied him again, not for answers she could extract, but for meaning she had to interpret on her own. "In my world," she said, "not knowing is considered failure." Ethan gave a small, thoughtful nod. "In mine, it is where most of the important things start." The words settled into her awareness with a weight she could not quantify, because they did not come with certainty. They came with possibility, and possibility was something she had never been trained to handle. She turned slightly, her reflection faintly visible in the dark surface of the console behind her, her own eyes staring back, luminous, controlled, but now holding something she did not recognize, something that had not been placed there by duty or expectation. She focused on that reflection, not reading it, not analyzing it, just looking, and in that moment, the faint presence within her became clearer, not louder, not more defined, but more real, as if acknowledging it allowed it to exist more fully. She inhaled slowly, the breath steady, intentional, and when she exhaled, the noise did not rush back in to reclaim her attention. It remained at the edges, waiting, no longer dominant. "I have spent my entire life hearing everyone else," she said quietly, her gaze still on her own reflection, "and I do not know who I am without them." Ethan's voice came from just behind her, calm, grounded, unchanged. "Then maybe this is where you find out," he said, and there was no instruction in his tone, no expectation, just an invitation. And for the first time, Lasara Vane stood in a room full of potential thoughts, full of voices she could access at any moment, and chose not to reach for them, not because she could not, but because she was beginning to understand that The one voice she had never truly heard was the only one that had ever been missing. The silence held, but it no longer felt fragile. It felt deliberate, like something chosen rather than something stumbled into. Lysara remained facing her reflection for a moment longer, watching the subtle rise and fall of her own breathing, the faint shift in her expression that she would have once ignored, catalogued, or dismissed as irrelevant. But now it felt like the only thing that mattered, the only signal that was truly hers. And then the chamber doors parted without her command, the soft mechanical whisper cutting through the quiet in a way that felt almost intrusive. Her awareness reacted instinctively, reaching outward before she could stop it. And suddenly the noise returned, not all at once, but enough. A surge of overlapping thoughts from the corridor beyond, structured, disciplined, controlled, yet undeniably present. Her posture straightened automatically, the reflex of authority snapping back into place as three members of the High Council entered, their movements precise, their minds louder than their footsteps, not chaotic, but layered with intention, expectation, concern. They stopped exactly 12 feet away, as protocol dictated, their eyes fixed on her, but their thoughts already speaking, questioning, calculating, evaluating the human presence in the room. Lysara felt the familiar clarity begin to reassert itself, the ease of knowing what would be said before it was spoken, the comfort of control returning like a well-worn path. But something in her resisted, not strongly, not yet, just enough to notice. "Your Highness," the lead counselor said aloud, though his mind had already formed the sentence seconds before. "We have reviewed the anomaly you encountered in the assembly." Lysara did not respond immediately, not because she did not know what he would say next, but because she was choosing whether or not to listen. Ethan remained where he stood, unmoving, his presence unchanged, still that quiet center in a room that was beginning to fill again. The counselor's thoughts pressed forward, analyzing him, labeling him, categorizing him as a potential risk, a variable outside established models. Their concern was not fear, it was disruption, and disruption demanded correction. Lysara felt the pull of their certainty, the structured logic that had defined her entire existence. It would be easy to follow it, to return to the system, to let their voices guide her back into the familiar. "We recommend immediate containment," another counselor added, his voice calm, but his thoughts sharper, outlining procedures, outcomes, probabilities, all of it precise, all of it predictable. Lysara's gaze shifted slightly, not toward them, but toward Ethan, and in that moment, the contrast became undeniable. Behind her, a chorus of clarity that required no effort to understand. In front of her, a silence that required everything. She drew in a slow breath, feeling the noise press against her awareness, offering certainty, offering control, offering the safety of knowing. And then she did something she had never done before. She chose not to listen, not completely, not fully. She let their thoughts remain at the edge, accessible but not dominant. And in that space she felt it again, that quiet presence within herself, steadier now, less faint, not louder, but more certain in its existence. "No," she said, the word simple, but carrying a weight that surprised even her. The counselors paused, not because they did not understand the word, but because they had not predicted it. Their thoughts shifted immediately, recalculating, reassessing, searching for the reason behind her decision. But for once, there was no clear path to follow, no pattern to match. Lysara stepped forward slightly, placing herself between them and the human without fully realizing she had done so. Not as a defensive gesture, but as a choice. "He is not a threat," she continued, her voice steady, but no longer guided by the expectations pressing against her mind. The counselors exchanged brief glances, their thoughts now louder with confusion than certainty. And for the first time, Lysara did not resolve that confusion for them. She did not reach in, did not clarify, did not control the outcome before it unfolded. She allowed the uncertainty to exist, both in them and in herself. And behind her, Ethan Cole remained silent, not offering support, not interfering, simply present. And in that presence, Lysara realized something that would have been impossible for her to understand even hours before. That power was not always in knowing every thought in the room. Sometimes, it was in choosing which ones to hear, and for the first time, she chose her own. The word no did not echo, but its impact did, not through sound, but through the sudden shift in every mind present. Lasara felt it immediately, the ripple of recalibration moving through the counselors like a system encountering an unexpected variable. Their thoughts no longer aligned in neat predictive patterns, instead branching outward, searching for explanations, for errors, for hidden factors they might have missed, but there was nothing to find, because for the first time, her decision had not come from data, not from probability, but from something they could not access, something even she was only beginning to understand. She held her position, not rigid, not defensive, just certain in a way that did not require validation. The lead counselor stepped forward half a pace, his expression carefully neutral, but his thoughts sharp with restrained urgency, calculations unfolding in precise layers, assessing risk, projecting outcomes, trying to restore order to a moment that had slipped beyond their control. "Your Highness," he said again, this time more deliberate, as if the structure of the words might anchor the situation back into familiarity. "With respect, the human represents an unknown factor that cannot be measured or monitored through established means." Lasara heard the statement, both spoken and unspoken, but she did not let it take hold. She let it pass through her awareness without anchoring to it, a skill she had never needed until now. Her gaze remained steady, not on the counselor, but slightly beyond, as if she were focusing on something deeper than the surface of the conversation. "That is precisely why he is not a threat," she replied, her voice calm, measured, but no longer shaped by the need to align with their expectations. The counselor's thoughts surged again, confusion layering over concern, because the logic did not fit. Their entire system was built on the assumption that what could not be known must be controlled, and what could not be controlled must be contained. But Lasara's response had bypassed that structure entirely. She felt their attempts to reconcile it, to map her reasoning, to predict her next move, and for the first time, she allowed them to fail. She did not correct them, did not guide them, did not offer the clarity they expected. Behind her, Ethan remained silent, his presence unchanged, not reacting to the tension, not attempting to influence it, simply existing within it without adding to it. And that absence continued to shape the room more than any argument could have. Lasara became aware of the contrast again, the layered noise behind her, structured and insistent, and the quiet behind her shoulder, steady and unintrusive. And between those two states, she recognized something she had never been taught: choice, not the kind defined by options laid out in advance, but the kind that emerged when no clear path existed. The lead counselor hesitated, a fraction of a second, but enough to reveal that certainty had been disrupted, if not containment. He said carefully, then observation, his thoughts aligning quickly with the compromise, a way to reintroduce structure without direct conflict. Lasara considered it, not by scanning their intentions, not by calculating outcomes, but by turning inward, briefly, feeling for that quiet presence she had begun to recognize as her own. It was still there, subtle, steady, not offering answers, but guiding her away from the noise that demanded them. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself in that unfamiliar clarity. "He will remain under my direct authority," she said. The words simple, but decisive. The counselor's thoughts shifted again, this time not resisting, but adjusting, because her authority was absolute. Even if her reasoning was not understood, they could not override it, only adapt to it. "As you command," the lead counselor replied, though his thoughts continued to analyze, to question, to search for meaning in a decision that did not follow any pattern they recognized. Lasara inclined her head slightly, signaling the end of the exchange, and, one by one, the counselors stepped back, their presence receding, their thoughts fading into the broader network beyond the chamber, until the room was quiet again. Not completely, never completely, but enough that the silence returned to the center, where it had begun. Lasara remained where she stood for a moment, feeling the absence of their voices, the space they had left behind, and then she turned slowly, her gaze finding Ethan once more, and this time, there was no hesitation, no analysis, no attempt to read what could not be read, only recognition, because in a world defined by knowing, He was the only thing that had ever allowed her to choose, and that choice had just changed everything. The chamber did not return to what it had been, even after the counselors left, because something fundamental had shifted and could not be reversed. Lasara stood in the quiet they had left behind, not reaching for the fading echoes of their thoughts, not reclaiming the constant awareness that had once defined her. She simply remained, present in a way she had never allowed herself to be. The distant hum of the station systems filled the air, low and steady, a mechanical rhythm that required no interpretation, no response. And for the first time, she noticed how different it felt from the noise of living minds. It did not demand anything from her. It just existed. Ethan had not moved, not during the exchange, not after. His stillness no longer. Strange, but understood. He watched her with the same quiet attention, not waiting for instruction, not anticipating her next decision, just allowing the moment to settle. Lasara turned toward him fully, her posture no longer defined by the rigid precision of command, but by something more grounded, more deliberate. She took a step forward, then another, closing the space between them until only a few feet remained, not as a display of authority, but as a choice to stand within that silence. Again, she did not attempt to reach into his mind, did not test the boundary that had once unsettled her. She accepted it, and in that acceptance, the need to understand it completely began to fade. All my life, she said slowly, her voice carrying a quiet clarity that had not been there before. I believed that knowing everything was the same as understanding it. She held his gaze, not searching, not probing, just present. But it is not. Ethan listened, his expression unchanged but attentive, as if he recognized the weight of what she was saying without needing to analyze it. Lasara exhaled softly, feeling the absence of external voices not as a loss, but as space. There is a difference between hearing thoughts and knowing truth, she continued, the words forming without the influence of any mind but her own, and I have never truly known the difference until now. Ethan nodded slightly, not affirming, not correcting, just acknowledging. Most people do not, he said, his voice calm. They just get there in a different way. Lasara considered that, not as a concept to be measured, but as an experience she was only beginning to understand. She glanced briefly toward the viewport, the storm still moving slowly across the planet below, patterns that once felt predictable, now carrying a quiet unpredictability she could appreciate without needing to control. When she looked back at him, something in her expression had softened, not weakened, but changed. You did not give me silence, she said, her tone steady, certain. You showed me that it was always there. Ethan's gaze held hers, steady, grounded, and for a moment neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of awareness, full of choice, full of something that did not require explanation. Lasara turned slightly, her reflection catching in the dark surface of the chamber once more, but this time she did not study it for answers. She simply recognized it, not as a projection shaped by others, but as something that existed on its own. She had not lost her power. She had not abandoned her ability to hear the countless minds around her, but she had found something beyond it, something that could not be measured, predicted, or controlled, and in a galaxy where everything was defined by knowledge and dominance, that discovery was more powerful than either. She stepped back just enough to take in the room again, the quiet, the light, the presence of the one being she could not read, and for the first time, that absence did not unsettle her, it grounded her, because it reminded her of the one thing she had finally learned to hear, herself. And in that moment, Lasara Vane understood something that no amount of telepathy could have ever revealed, that the most important truths were never the ones you could take from someone else, but the ones you chose to find in silence.